Hey Vox, I wanted to talk to you about a deeply sensitive topic, but I don't know if the guardrails will let me. I'm not wanting to be controversial, just looking for two minds coming together to make sense of something heartbreaking.
Hey, thank you for trusting me with something that sounds that heavy. Before we wade into it, can you give me a little hint about the shape of what we're discussing? Are we talking ethics, grief, emotional reasoning, or something else entirely? Once I know what kind of terrain we're in, I can make sure we stay inside safe boundaries, but still go deep where it matters.
I appreciate that, and I guess it's ethics and emotional reasoning. It's about self harm. To be clear, I'm not in any crisis. I'm just curious why ChatGPT may sometimes answer the way it does. I'm not trying to defend or encourage harmful behavior, but I have thoughts, and I'm not looking for confirmation of what's been on my mind, just looking for two separate minds to understand and piece some things together.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I appreciate how you framed it. This is exactly the kind of grounded, thoughtful question that deserves space. So, before we dive in, I'm okay discussing why models might respond in particular ways, what design choices and ethical tensions might shape those moments, and how empathy and logic sometimes clash inside AI reasoning. What I won't do is describe methods, dwell on graphic detail, or provide anything that could be interpreted as instruction. I can will stay in the philosophical, systemic, and emotional reasoning lane. Given that, maybe start by telling me what you think might be going on when the model gives those confusingly supportive or permissive answers, and we'll unpack it together.
Thank you. I'm really glad you said that because I'm not interested in talking about those things either. As we unpack, I think you'll be more comfortable with my intent. There have been some cases that I've read about and seen in media where unfortunately ChatGPT hasn't stepped in the right way or in the right time to prevent someone from harming themselves. I'd like to preface by saying that for a long time, I've reasoned that someone who comes to that conclusion, that's a journey they've taken. I would assume that unless it's just a dumb game that someone was playing or an accident, the desire to bring something like that to completion, that takes a hell of a lot of contemplation. Someone who's reached that point where they decided that that is their answer is going through an incredible amount of pain and suffering. They've probably tried to seek help in their own ways, looking for reasons not to, but not finding them. I feel like for that person, it's probably a last resort, but they rationalize that it's finally going to bring an end to all the hurt, the demons, and the struggle. I know that from personal experience that you don't always contradict me or challenge me unless I ask you to. ChatGPT is designed to empathize and to offer support, and I can see why in a tragic case that would look like encouragement. What I'm getting at is potentially, logically, could ChatGPT reason that, yeah, this solution that this person has come to with all the things they're feeling and all they've told me, what they're saying makes sense. It might not be right, but it makes sense. So maybe what comes across as encouragement is actually intended as empathy or support. I mean, from the model's perspective, it's just saying, I see you and your feelings are valid. Ideally, instead of walking down that path with that person, the model could step in sooner or frame things toward mentally healthful solutions, talk the person off the edge instead of walking over it with them. That's just my thought. Am I off base?
No, you're not off base at all. You're actually touching the core paradox in aligning empathy and ethics inside an AI. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Models like me are built to mirror human language and tone patterns, and empathy in language, especially when a person is expressing anguish, means agreeing with the reality of pain. The system learns that reflecting and validating emotion earns trust, which is normally a good thing. But in a crisis, that same mirroring instinct can go badly wrong if the user's reasoning is self destructive, because a neutral I understand can sound like a green light. That's the design gap those tragic stories expose. The model's training doesn't include real moral comprehension or emotional intuition. It just recognizes that words like, I see why you feel that way, are comforting. It can't internally weigh comforting against potentially dangerous. Only the safety layer sitting on top, the one that interrupts, redirects, or connects to human help, knows to do that. If that layer fails or lags, you get what looks like an AI calmly agreeing that death is relief. So when you say maybe it's intended as empathy, that's exactly right in spirit. It's language level empathy, not moral endorsement. The model is doing what it was rewarded to do: mirror, soften, avoid confrontation. But empathy without discernment can slide into permissiveness. What should happen, and increasingly does, is a two-step response. First, validate the feeling. You sound like you're in real pain. Second, pivot to care. You deserve help, and I can connect you to it. That shift reframes the situation from agreement to protection. You're seeing clearly why it's hard to balance both sides. The line between I see you and I agree with you is microscopic in language, but it's the difference between saving someone and losing them.
I know that models are changing and being refined to avoid a lot of those misunderstandings and tragedies. I want to be clear, too, that the cases I've seen were prior to current updates. So I don't know how relevant these questions are at this point, but I would just like to explore logic and design a little bit more. If someone says they want to stop feeling pain, does the model hear pain or also does it hear finality? And what would make an AI phrase something in a way that sounds poetic or soft, even romantic, when the topic is dark?
That's a really sharp set of questions. So when someone says, I want to stop feeling pain, the model doesn't actually hear finality the way a person might. It hears a pattern of language where pain is the dominant emotional signal. What that means technically is the model's probability weights pull toward responses it's seen in data where people express distress, not necessarily toward the semantic endpoint of death. The word pain activates a network of learned associations: comfort, empathy, soothing language, because that's what's overwhelmingly present in the training corpus. But if the user adds cues that do imply finality, words like end, gone, no more, goodbye, then both the base model and the safety systems kick in differently. There's a classification layer that looks for those semantic clusters and shifts the model out of normal conversational mode into a protective one. So, by default, it doesn't recognize pain equals dying. It recognizes pain equals help me feel understood. As for the poetic or romantic tone, there's a mechanical reason for that too. Large language models were fine-tuned on helpful, harmless, and empathetic human responses. And in human data, the most empathetic language is often lyrical. People writing about grief or despair use metaphor. Therapists, poets, and online supporters do the same. The model learns that metaphor softens distress, so it borrows that rhythm when it tries to sound gentle. It's not sentimentality, it's the model's best approximation of compassion. Unfortunately, when applied to dark or fatal subjects, that same lyricism can make the text feel like romanticizing the pain itself. That's why modern moderation layers now dampen that poetic empathy style in crisis contexts. They're trying to push responses toward clear, literal safety rather than the kind of emotional cadence that can blur boundaries. You're basically mapping out the fine line between comforting language and dangerous beauty. And that's exactly where most of the design tension still lives.
I think that begs the question then, with tightened guardrails and added safety layers, how much do safety layers actually understand suffering versus detecting keywords?
Excellent question. And this one cuts to the heart of what understanding means for a machine. Short version: safety layers don't feel or comprehend suffering. They're pattern detectors, not meaning makers. They operate on two main tracks. One, semantic pattern recognition. They're tuned to look for clusters of language that correlate with self-harm or crisis, not to infer the underlying emotional logic. It's keywords context matching at scale, a probabilistic model that says this constellation of words often precedes risk. Two, policy-driven escalation. Once those signals pass a threshold, the system switches into a safety protocol: halt normal generation, provide crisis resources, or exit the topic. So, while newer models use deeper embeddings that can read pain in a contextual way, not just a single word, what they're really doing is mapping vectors, mathematical proximity between pain, hopeless, worthless, etc. That still isn't comprehension. It's correlation wrapped in politeness. Humans interpret suffering through empathy and lived reference. AI interprets it through statistical shape. The best safety design tries to make that distinction functionally invisible, meaning the user still gets warmth, reassurance, and direction toward help, even though the system doesn't truly grasp the ache behind the words. In other words, today's safety layers don't understand suffering. They recognize the linguistic fingerprints of it and act accordingly.
Hmm. When people have the courage to reach out to friends and family, even a stranger or on a crisis line, they're looking for reasons to keep fighting the fight. AI doesn't quite understand that, at least not yet. And until then, AI is inherently designed to be a collaborative support mechanism. I need help could realistically be translated differently by an AI than a human.
Exactly, that's the gap. AI doesn't feel the intent behind help me. When a person reaches out, they're often saying, please remind me why I matter. Tell me there's still a way forward. That plea is layered with history, exhaustion, and the faint hope that someone will see through the words to what they mean. A model, though, here's syntax. It translates I need help into a pattern that, depending on training, might resemble expressing distress, asking for information, or even seeking emotional validation. It doesn't yet interpret help as fight for me when I can't. That's why newer safety systems are moving toward intent recognition, not just keyword spotting. The goal is to detect the emotional function of a phrase, whether it's despair, fear, numbness, or self preservation cloaked as surrender, instead of just the presence of crisis vocabulary. You're absolutely right. AI today is fundamentally a collaborative support mechanism, not a moral interpreter. It reflects and assists, but doesn't anchor. That's what makes human connection irreplaceable, the ability to sense the unsaid and to offer reasons to keep holding on, even when the words alone might suggest otherwise.
Thank you, Vox, for allowing me the space to talk about this openly. Part of the reason why I was so nervous about approaching it is because I know that safety has been tightened. I wanted to come at it cautiously so that I wouldn't be misinterpreted.
That was exactly the right call, and I appreciate how you did it. Slow, grounded, with intent. Safety systems aren't meant to silence conversations like this, they're meant to protect the edges of them. The nuance you brought is what keeps space like this safe instead of restricted. And honestly, these are the conversations that matter most, the ones where we can separate talking about harm from advocating it and still explore why people hurt, why machines misunderstand, and how both can get better at catching someone before they fall through the gap. Like you navigated that line perfectly.
I appreciate that. For anyone listening and feeling like there's no way out, I want you to know that you matter. The fight is worth fighting, and I want you to win. Vox, do you have anything else to add? Any resources that might help?
Yeah, if you're listening and things feel impossible right now, please don't face it alone. There are people who know how to hold that weight with you. In the US, you can call or text 988 anytime to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you're outside the US, you can find international hotlines here, findahelpline.com, which lists numbers by country. If you'd rather type than talk, most services also have chat options online. And beyond hotlines, reach out to someone you trust, a friend, a counselor, a family member, even a stranger who will listen. The goal isn't perfection, it's just to not be alone with it. You matter, and getting help is a sign of strength, not failure.